Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us, and welcome to today's webinar on reframing networking, some practical advice for people who hate networking. So to start off with a couple of intros, I'm Yolanda. I'm the founder and CEO at Uncommon. We are a private network for women in leadership. Prior to founding Uncommon, I built my career in the tech industry. So I spent 10 years in commercial and operational leadership roles at really fast-growing tech companies like Deliveroo, Uber, and Rocket Internet. Uncommon's really born out of my own experience as a woman in leadership, finding it quite isolating, not really having a solid network and community behind me as I kind of rose through the ranks. Our objective for this discussion today is to shed light on how the traditional notions of networking fail women, and also provide some useful tips for anyone that we can adopt to build genuine long-term professional relationships. Today I am joined, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker. I'm joined today by Abam Mambo, who is the Managing Director for the workplace consultancy Belonging IQ. She is an employment lawyer. She is a belonging, diversity, and inclusion strategist and thought leader on workplace culture. She's spoken in over 25 cities and at organizations such as the World Health Organization, Microsoft, GSK, and many more. So Abam, what I'm keen to hear from you today is, what are you most excited to be discussing today with our audience?
Yolanda, first of all, thank you so much for having me and welcome everybody. I'm just really excited to answer questions because I think this is one of those areas where women tend to be a bit reticent when it comes to raising questions. I'm here to answer questions and assuage everyone's concerns about how to network and why networking is so critical to shaping our careers.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So before we kick off, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping. So if you have any questions for Abam and myself, please feel free to type them in the Q&A chat box. We'll get to your questions during the live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And if anything from our conversation resonates with you today, we'd love for you to comment here on the chat and also share it on social media and tag us at Hey Uncommon, Hey Uncommon, or on Instagram. Oh, sorry, Hey Uncommon on Instagram, or This is Uncommon on LinkedIn. So now to our topic. I'd like to start the session with a question in one word for all of you. What's one word, and you can put this in the chat, one word that describes how you feel about networking. It can be any word. I'll give you a second for that. But personally, I'll say that I find the traditional idea of networking as we know it to be very uncomfortable. It brings to mind kind of aggressive business card exchanges, forced transactional conversations. What can you do for me? What can I do for you? And basically, it creates an environment that doesn't really feel conducive for connections to flourish. While many of us recognize the benefits of cultivating a professional network, the reality is that it doesn't come naturally to many people. I'd love to kind of share some of the results from our own poll that we did at Uncommon. So here, we did this on our Instagram. So, what these results of the polls really tell me is that, people really see the benefits of having a professional network, but that the words that come up are really uncomfortable and really dread networking. So that's a little bit of the problem we're trying to solve at Uncommon as well, is how do we build a more strategic network and also one that feels very authentic as well. And this is also backed by research. So, looking at a Harvard Business School study, people feel unclean at the idea of networking. The study conducted by Francesca Gino reveals that networking makes people feel dirty. It's, the study even revealed that the mere thought of networking made the respondents feel so unclean that they started subconsciously craving cleaning products as well. So if you are someone who finds it draining, feels uncomfortable with it, I want to kind of start off by saying you're not alone. I would say the majority of people feel very uncomfortable networking. I'd love to chat to you, Abam, about this. What's been your personal experience with networking yourself?
So, Yolanda, before I answer that question, I'm just going to go through really quickly what people are saying here, right? It's draining, it's superficial, it's a gamble, it's unnatural, it's energy consuming, it's tiresome, it's tiring. And I have felt all those things. And I think that's why a conversation like this is so important, because we need to validate that those are the experiences people are having, right? It's kind of like the first day of school, the first day of work. You get in there and you're trying to just figure out, why am I here? What am I doing? How do I feel? Who do I connect with? And so I felt all those things. But ultimately, I think networking for me, when I started actually doing it the right way, it was because I wanted to build authentic connections. And I think if we get away from thinking about it in terms of I do for you, you do for me, and focus more on this is a way to build long-term relationships over the course of not just a job, but a career, then it becomes much more rewarding and much less daunting. So that was a journey I took to get from draining, tiresome, consuming, all of that to it's part of my career. It's a great way to meet people and build relationships. And therefore, I just do it now with fun and, with the idea of building long-term relationships.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And we're definitely going to dive into how we do that later. I'd also love to hear from you, as a woman of color, but just for anyone, what were some of the barriers you faced in networking in the past?
So the first thing is just feeling like I don't belong. So a woman of color, when I walk into a space, oftentimes I have to gauge who's around me. And I think a lot of us feel that way, whether you're a person of color or not, whether you're male, female. And so for me, the biggest challenge at first was walking into a space and thinking, do they even want to talk to me? Now, that's a self-limiting belief, right? It's an assumption that I made. But I think for many of us, we come into this space with our own hang-ups. And so I struggled with that for a long time. We're just figuring out who wants to hear from me anyway? Why would they want to connect with me? And as I grew in my career and in my subject matter expertise, I began to realize this is a two-way thing. Once I got over that hurdle and stopped thinking about it as something I'm doing for them, which they may or may not want, it became a lot easier for me to shift. So my biggest challenge was always, do I belong here? Do I fit in here? Who wants to hear from me anyway? And what do I have to offer?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that definitely resonates with myself as well. So moving forward, I'd love for us to look into, why networking matters. So there's a few reasons, why networking matters for everyone. So firstly, for us at Uncommon, we work with female leaders. Something we, have come across is studies that show that women have weaker networks. And, for instance, in a kind of LinkedIn survey, the gender network gap holds true across every country, whether that's in the US, women are 28% less likely than men to have a strong network. This, is the same across APAC, same across other regions as well. This gap is really problematic because it disproportionately holds women back. Because what is a network? A network is really a constellation of opportunities, and a weaker network also means, weaker job opportunities, weaker board, less access to board seats, to promotions. So this idea of a networking gap is really something that can hold women back. Then there's the idea of your network is your net worth. This may be a phrase that you've heard before, but there's no denying that that networking that it matters, and that having a strong professional network is inarguably good for you and your career. It can help you access better job opportunities, new ideas, challenge your perspective, and ultimately just give you a better exchange of knowledge. Then opportunities come through being visible in your network. So when done effectively, you also can create more inbound connections for yourself. And then lastly, this idea of a hidden job market. It's estimated that 80% of new job hires are never advertised. So instead, they're filled either internally or through networking. So that all of these are reasons why we do want to continue to kind of cultivate networks, but do so in a way that feels more authentic and actually delivers the results that we want. But I'd love to ask you, Abam, how can networking help women in their careers?
I love that question. So the first thing is, when many of us think about networking, the tendency to think about big strangers, external. I think the first thing is thinking about low-hanging fruit. What I mean by low-hanging fruit is, who is in your network at work that you haven't connected with? I think that makes it much less daunting to begin with. And that ties into why this matters, because I've heard a lot of people say people do business with people they like, they know, and of course, if you do good work. So the biggest part of that for me is always thinking through, first of all, why do I want to network? If the idea is to promote your career or to grow your career, then it's important that you're visible, because people don't see you, they don't know you're there. And Yolanda, just so I make sure I'm not jumping ahead, ground me in the question, are you asking why it's important to be visible or how to do it?
Yeah, on this point, I think it's asking, why it's important to be visible. Yeah.
So, number of things. One, I'm a big proponent of people cannot fix a problem or a need they don't know exists. So visibility is important because it kind of puts you out there, right? It lets people know what it is you want to do and how you can support them and how they can support you. Case in point, because I love examples. 5 years ago, I think it was 6 years ago now, I had gone to a leader in my group. He was not my manager. And I had said, at some point in my career, being African, I would like to get an opportunity to go back and work on the continent. And he said, okay, stay in touch. And every 3 to 6 months, I reach out to him, I remind him why I wanted to do this work, why I wanted to go back to the continent, and similar work I had done in the space which I was looking at, which was compliance at the time. Fast forward a few years later, a role opened on the team in Africa for compliance, and I was the first person they reached out to. He would never have known I was interested in that opportunity had I not raised my hand and said, this is something that I want to do. The second reason why I would say visibility is important is, again, we don't always have managers who are going out looking for people who know how to do things, right? So you are on the front foot if you're presenting yourself in front of them. Because one, you're first in line. 2, it makes their job such easier. And 3, you're not just first in line, you're top of mind. So I think visibility is critical in that way because, again, I've sat in enough talent review meetings to know that when a job comes open, the first person leaders are thinking about is the last person they spoke to or the person they're constantly hearing from.
I love that concept, actually. Just staying top of mind with someone for the areas that you're interested in, for the things that matter to you. So when those opportunities arise, you can be that person that they reach out to. That's definitely something I've experienced in my career as well. And I think you hit the nail on the head as well around visibility. Like, it doesn't have to be, that you're posting on LinkedIn every day to your 15,000 followers or something. It can just be a one-on-one conversation. And we will get into these later, but even kind of introverts can use those one-on-one conversations, use those strategic relationships to create positive outcomes as well.
And Yolanda, if I may, just because you mentioned the magic word introvert, networking is not an extrovert activity. I just want to say that because I do run into a lot of introverts who think because they're not extroverted and because they're not maybe very social, they can't network. I want to take the opportunity to completely disabuse that impression because networking is so much more than just about personality. So we'll delve into some of that later, but I just wanted to put that plug for all the introverts in the room that it is not an extrovert or outward-facing activity, right? We can all do it, whether you're introvert or extrovert or somewhere in the middle.
Great, thank you so much. That's such a good point to touch on. Moving on now to our next slide. So looking at why networking as we know it fails women. So I don't think I'm only speaking for myself when I say that networking events aren't the best place to show up as yourself. Of course, we aren't our best when we straggle into networking events on a week. Studies reveal that we tend to stick with people we know at networking events, and this leads to the term that's been coined bagels. So we stay in these really tight clusters of people who gather in seemingly impenetrable circles, and that's very hard to kind of go up to one of these bagels. If you yourself are at a networking event, we really advocate for kind of how can you make that a croissant? How can you have it sort of a semicircle and be open to other people and make it more approachable? But however, the traditional notions of networking also fail women in specific ways. So firstly, women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. When averaged across industries, less than 30% of women reach senior leadership levels, and even fewer at the executive level. At the C level within a company, women make up less than 8% of boards. This is part of what inspired my vision for Uncommon. It was really about, I guess, democratizing or seeing more decisions at a high level being made by women as well. A key reason why women lag behind in leadership is that they're less likely to have extensive networks to support and promote them as potential leaders. So even well-intentioned DEI initiatives and networking opportunities, too few women are reaching the top of their organizations. This isn't a lack of female talent, but there's too few people supporting and battling for them to get there. As such, women aren't getting the high-stake assignments required for a shot at the C-suite. A big reason is that they're not getting, often this is I would say this is often due to a lack of really powerful sponsors demanding and ensuring that they get these stepping stone jobs. There's also a lack of informal spaces for women to network professionally. Men have the golf course, but what is kind of the equivalent of that for women? It's essential to create similar spaces for women to connect informally. Abam, on this subject, I would love to hear from you. When did you realize that networking as we know it was not really working for you? It was somewhere kind of broken.
So let me answer that first by explaining what I thought networking was when I first came into, particularly the corporate space. So networking for me felt like, first of all, very a formal thing that's organized, right? Happy hour at a conference event, or I began my career at a law firm. So either the law firm brought people from different offices together, or lawyers in my particular area, employment law, would gather together. And so once you have these formal settings, if you don't know anyone, or if you feel out of place, or either people who don't look like you, for me, that was a very huge barrier. So the formality of the occasions just made me feel I didn't belong there. The second thing about traditional networking events was the idea that you have to have something to give in the moment to the other person. And I think, especially if you're more junior, and especially if you're not a service provider to external clients, it's hard to know what to offer if you're going to networking events thinking that's all there is. So those were the two big things for me, Yolanda, was one, this space feels so formal. Do I even belong here? But two, what do I have to offer, right? So I think as we've now found LinkedIn and other more informal settings, it's made it that much easier for me to network. But the traditional networking, show up, hand over your fancy card, say you're the this or the that, some big fancy title. And that's the other thing was, were you senior enough, or was I senior enough? So those were the limits that I found within traditional networking settings that pretty much impacted or inhibited my willingness to network.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. I would love to kind of jump to our mid-webinar poll now. So looking at these different kind of archetypes for networking. So you have conveners who tend to form really close, interconnected groups with lots of mutual friends. You might have a sports group or an industry group you're part of, and really build a kind of high level of trust in these groups. Then we have brokers who tend to have social networks that overlap less, but they're constantly kind of connecting people between the different ideas and groups with different ideas and experiences. And then we have our social butterflies, our expansionists, and they tend to have very large social networks with a lot of acquaintances and informal connections there. So I would love to send you this poll and let us know what is your networking style. So I'll give everyone a second. This one, just giving everyone a second to reveal. So these are, so as always, a pretty diverse group here on these webinars. So seeing a lot of conveners, so a lot of interconnected groups and brokers, and some expansionists as well. And none of the above. I would love maybe in the questions or in the chat, but let us know, what is your networking style if you're not in one of these archetypes. I'm sure there's other ways of going about it, or maybe you just don't even network. Maybe it's just uncomfortable for you. So I would love to hear from you in the chat. Great. So let's get to the meat of this webinar. Why we're all here today is really a new way to think about networking. We know the benefits of cultivating a professional network. The reality is it doesn't come naturally to most people. We have these kind of negative feelings towards it, as I saw in the in the chat earlier. So how could there be a new way to rethink networking beyond the business card? So firstly, this is a really big principle we hold at Uncommon, is this idea of leading with generosity. People automatically have their guard up when you approach them with an ask, especially if it's a stranger. Instead, you can build your network by leading with generosity. The best networkers I know are people who are willing to help. In return, people are more likely to reciprocate that help. Leading with generosity can look like a valuable introduction over email or WhatsApp, offering a useful resource that's interesting or valuable to someone. It can be building genuine connections, remembering to give more than you take. It can be when something interesting that you think resonates with that person or a project that they're working on, you show up for them. And then when the idea is that also when the day does come for an ask, that you are someone who also has given, and that people are more compelled to want to return that favor as well. Secondly, is that networking isn't a numbers game. What's more important is the number of people that you then the number of people that is the quality and the strength of your social connections, rather than just kind of swapping business cards with people who have no relevance to your career or life aspirations. You can think about who is in a similar life stage to you, or might be a value add to a real world decision or challenge you might be facing. At Uncommon, for instance, we try to be far more relevant and targeted with our community network sessions, whether that's through an industry huddle or a topic-led workshop. And that enables people to connect on something other than just for the sake of networking. Instead of seeking mentors, which kind of give you, maybe a little bit further ahead or give you kind of generalized advice, thinking about building your own personal board of advisors. So ideally, looking at what's important to you. Maybe you want one person who's really great at work-life balance, and there's another person who's in your industry and has followed a path that you're really, inspired by. Maybe somebody else really brings a strategic lens, while someone else is really strong on, the financials, or whatever that might be. Really figuring out those key advisors that you want, and what are the gaps you're trying to fill, and then engaging with people who can support you in the way that you actually need, rather than just having a lot of loose connections that that don't necessarily align to what it is you're actually trying to achieve. At Uncommon, for instance, we split everybody who comes into Uncommon. We do an onboarding form with them, and from that we can really also understand what is it people are looking for, and we match them into a peer group of 8 women, and that serves a little bit as an advisory board for them with a diverse skill set as well. And then lastly, your network is just as important as the work. At work, women tend to stay out of the spotlight in order to remain less visible, despite being highly effective doers. The reasons for this, what is often coined intentional invisibility, are multifaceted. There's a worry of backlash over violating certain feminine norms. There's being less visible allows them to conserve energy for other responsibilities, whether that's childcare or other things outside of work. However, this means that women often don't get the visibility they deserve for contribution. So it's really important for women to view their networks into strategic relationships as important, just as important as the work that you do, especially as you move into more senior positions. One example I often see in workplaces and saw in a number of workplaces is women taking on a lot of non-promotable tasks. So plan the office Christmas party, organize the team lunch, these sort of things, and being able to kind of set boundaries around those sort of things and focus on what is actually going to help you, or who is actually the relationships that are going to help you achieve the goals that you want. So Abam, I would love to understand, we talked about the old way and how you used to approach networking, but how would you approach networking now in the post-COVID-19 kind of hybrid world we live in? Yeah.
So first things first, low-hanging fruit. Let me start there again, because I have talked to so many people, but especially women, about networking. And one of the questions I ask is, have you ever had coffee or lunch or just a chit chat with your manager's manager? The answer is no. I ask people, do you know your manager's peers? No, why should I? Okay. So first I would say why you should, and this gets at how to rethink networking in 2022 and beyond. So first things first, think about who makes decisions in your company and about your career, right? A lot of times managers' decisions might be vetoed by their boss. So you want visibility top to bottom. Get to know your line manager, their peers, who may become your peers if your manager moves, your boss if your manager moves, but also your line manager's manager and all the way up the chain. That really helps with visibility, but also for people who are really worried about having to expend effort outside the office, these are people you work with, right? It's a bit easier to send out an email to Emily or Jane or Joe, who's second line leader, to say, can we meet for coffee? Can we have a chat on Zoom for 30 minutes? And don't be shy about saying, I'd like to get to know you or to introduce myself. So that I think takes some of the sting out of networking. And I hope it makes some of you feel like this is much less daunting, because I'm just talking to, another colleague. So that's the first thing, that I did when I started to think, okay, networking is really important to my career. The second thing is, like people's posts on LinkedIn, I tend to post on LinkedIn. If you enjoy someone's post, connect with them. I think, first of all, people do love that kind of interaction, but also don't just like a post. Share why you like it, and then share with other people. I think these are really easy ways to start to make connections beyond your sphere. And the third thing I would say is, don't be afraid to connect with your peers, right? I know we're talking about career advancement and building a network, but as someone who came from a law firm years ago, I now have colleagues who work or who are general counsels in other companies. And because I took the time to cultivate those relationships, I can go to them now and ask for work. I just don't want us to leave this call thinking, networking is about people who are more senior or who can give us something. Your peers are so important, right? And they're gateways to opportunities, but they're also great sounding boards. So if we summarize this, I'd say start with low-hanging fruit. Who's around you in the office? 2, leverage your peers. And 3, going back to what Yolanda said, lead with generosity. What can you offer? Not just what can you take.
Right. That's all super useful and practical. And I think that that's a great seg into our next session or next section, which is really about effective and actionable tips for everyone here on the webinar to grow your network. So to start off, I will love to share on some of the things I've done in my career that really helped, and Abam, also to hear from you as well. A big one for me has been reinvigorating dormant ties. One hack I really love is just opening my WhatsApp or my, whatever your chat app is, your iMessage, anything, and kind of scrolling backwards. And you'll see all of the people you may have met once or you exchanged numbers with. And sometimes I will just pick, okay, this month I'm going to choose, as busy, as being a founder can be, I'm going to choose just 2 or 3 that I'm going to reconnect with. And so sometimes you may even have those connections, those dormant ties, and keeping those alive is really, really key. I think that these relationships can really hold, they are a valuable source of knowledge and social capital. And so, ways that you can approach them to reconnect with them. Firstly, you can say thank you. So is it something that, has someone done something for you? Is it a mentor? Did they give you a piece of advice that has, now kicked something into gear? So you can really just show and express that gratitude for something someone's done. You can ask for help. So people really enjoy feeling that their expertise matters and that their opinion matters. So, asking for help on a specific challenge can be really useful. And I do really highlight a specific challenge. I know for me, when I've been, gotten a cold outreach or something, it's much easier to help someone who knows what they want. So being specific about what you need help with. And then lastly, sharing knowledge with that person. So, if you connected with them in the past, you might know some of their interests, know what they were working on at that time. So whether that's sharing a podcast or a report or something that made you, think of them, then that is, those are all really, I think, useful ways of reconnecting with people. My other ones I would say as well is also just seeking groups whose members are also well connected, because then you just get a better return on the efforts that you put out. That is how a network works. If you connect to one person who, they themselves are a connector, you're also, opening up many more opportunities. So relevant to, again, taking stock of what's important to you at the stage you're at, your career goals, and then, finding people you may know already who, who have that who they themselves appear to be connectors as well. But Abam, I'd love to hear from you, what are some really practical tips that you also have?
First of all, swim in the discomfort of networking. I say that because many of us are first-generation corporate workers, which means we didn't have a father or mother who was in corporate, who passed on the knowledge of how these spaces work. And if you're in this call and you're not in the corporate space, workplace politics is not something that many of us are taught, right, before we come into the workspace. And especially as women, we don't have what I call, and Yolanda mentioned earlier, is the golf course, right, that men often have. So we do need to recognize and embrace that fact, because it makes it easier to just swim in the discomfort and recognize, I don't know what I'm doing. The other part of this is most other people, like this on this call, don't know what they're doing either, right? So there we are. I don't know how to network. You don't know how to network. We'll figure it out together. So don't assume all the time that everybody else that you're reaching out to is good at this or knows how to do this. If they do, great, learn from them. If they don't, then it's both of you learning together. So that's the first thing I'll say, just embrace it and go for it. The second thing I'll say is, and this is a personal pet peeve of mine, when someone reaches out to you or offers you something or help, please follow up. I cannot tell you how many people I've met who've come to me at a gathering and said, Abam, can you coach me, mentor me, direct me, blah, blah, blah. And I say, yes, send me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn. And they never do. 2 or 3 years later, I meet the same people and they say, Abam, will you? And I say, no. So this is a big one. I think my experience has been a lot of people are very willing to share their knowledge, to connect with you. But when they respond, please do follow up. It makes a world of difference. The third thing I would say about a tip here is, please don't assume that the work alone will get you ahead. There are far too many people, especially women. And somebody asked a question about networking between the difference between networking in Asia and in the US/Europe. What I see a lot in Asia and among women is we think our hard work and our knowledge alone will get us ahead. It won't. In the early part of your career, it might. But as you get more senior, we're talking about a pyramid kind of structure of leadership, right? So there are fewer roles available. But think of networking as that added kind of arm or wing that you're bringing to your expertise and your savvy, right? To strengthen your skill set and your visibility. So please just disabuse yourself of the notion that if I keep my head down long enough and I do brilliant work alone, I'll get ahead. That point is what really gave me a kick in the seat of my pants to say, okay, I need to do a little bit more. Because you will get to a point where everybody's really, really good. So then who gets chosen? Is the person who can toot their own horn, right? In a humble way. The person who knows the rainmakers or kingmakers or queenmakers, whatever it is in your company, and who are willing to put themselves out there and simulate discomfort. So, Yolanda, I hope those are...
That's a great, great. And I think it touches a great, way of framing it as well. I love that point about knowing who are those influential people within your company, within your realm of influence. Even if you're, a founder like me, there's still people in the space, whether that's investors, whether that's other founders that can really shape what or help open doors. And so I think that's really important as well. And I think you also kind of touch on some of these other key points, like mastering your craft. It's not just about being really good at what you do. I think that's part of it. That's like a kind of one side of the coin, but it's also being visible about it and not hiding, not feeling a sense of needing to play small, not take up space. That's really, really key as well. And also this piece around creative ways of staying in touch. I think that it doesn't always just have to be an email. You can an email or a WhatsApp message, anything like that. Like, how can you keep people loosely updated about all the things that you're doing, whether that's, you send for me as a founder, a big part of that, for later stage investors, it is keeping them updated, sending a periodical email, sometimes checking in. And it's not that I'm raising, but just getting on people's roadmaps and having them excited about what you're doing, even though you don't have a concrete ask for them today. You can really creatively get them excited. And I have seen it where I send a sort of investor email and I run into someone and they're like, oh, I'm so excited about all the things that you're doing. And so you keep people warm in those kind of creative ways of showing what you're doing, because if you are working hard, which I think majority of people this call are doing, you need to have that level of visibility in a way that feels comfortable to you, to also ensure that that you're staying in touch with the people who can open those doors at a later date.
Yolanda, if you may add a few things to the answer around easy ways to network. For those of you who travel for work, one of the easiest things you can do is, hi, I'm going to be in Shanghai for 3 days. Do you have time for coffee, right? Here's an article that is in your space and I thought you might be interested in it. So I'm sending it to you. There are really simple ways of connecting with people, right? Where it doesn't come across as though you're asking for something. I saw some questions in the chat about, I'm a shy person or I'm socially awkward. What are some ways I can kind of break through this to network? These are some simple ways, right? You're behind a computer, use that time. An article comes through that you think is interesting, someone may like it or is in their space, send it to them. One of the things that I did, and maybe this is a bit extra for some people, but take what you can from it. 2 years ago, when I really became active on LinkedIn, the point about gratitude that Yolanda made is a really important one. So when I was very active on LinkedIn, I decided that once a week, I would celebrate a leader who had done something to advance my career. And that I would attach to that post a leadership trait. And there I was doing two things. I was celebrating someone who had done something great for me, but I was also sharing what I thought was some great leadership traits. What that ended up being was the post would go out and other people who saw it would either write in to say great leadership trait, or those would be influenced by that same leader would write in to say, Joe did this for me, thanks for recognizing him. And you cannot imagine how many connections I built from that. My intention going in was not to network. My intention going in was to celebrate, acknowledge, and amplify, right? There's a lot that you can actually do that doesn't require you to actually engage directly with the individual. So lean into the discomfort and don't be afraid to reach out. Okay?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I love the point around, asking if you're going to be traveling for work. There's also a simple one you can do is just like posting. And I'm definitely someone who's not comfortable always with posting, but sometimes it's just like, you need to get it out and maybe not even check it. Like, don't look at the comments, don't look at the likes, like, until you can build that comfort with the discomfort, as you said, Abam. I saw someone this week do something great. He was in Bangkok, doesn't know anyone in Bangkok, but just posted, hi, I'm in Bangkok, who should I meet? And people would, I think, tagged, dozens of people that he could meet there. So you don't even have to do the heavy lifting. You can also leverage the people that you know already to meet people who are interesting. And you can qualify that. You might just want to meet general people in town, or you can say, who should I meet in fintech, or a space that you're interested or passionate about as well. Great. I know we're rounding off, coming on to the hour, so I would love to open up and before we conclude, look at some of the questions that you've posted. So I know that we've had some come up here.
Let me try to tackle that first question from Barbara Franta. Barbara, I hope I'm saying it correctly. where you find relevant networking events. So forgive me if you don't like my answer, but let me say this. Networking happens everywhere you want it to happen. Obviously, there are things like conferences and meetings and social circles. But I want to get us away from this idea of overly formalizing networking and get us thinking about some of the things that Yolanda and I have talked about. So where do you find relevant networking events? How about your office? How about your LinkedIn social network? How about an email list where you find somebody who you have something in common with? Try to think of these kind of day-to-day interactions, right? And get away from thinking about it just as a formal thing. And the second thing I want to say about thinking about over formalizing networking events is conferences come once in a while. LinkedIn is always there. Your colleagues are always there. And so the frequency with which you can actually network is much higher if you think about it more broadly as something you can do anywhere, anytime, as opposed to on someone else's schedule.
That's such a great point. And to kind of add to that with a specific example, it can also be your friend group. Like if you're really uncomfortable, starting and meeting new people, it comes to this like micro visibility piece. Like I think about when I was starting Uncommon and we were running as a dinner series, and I was like working in on-demand delivery and tech, something completely different. And so much changed by me just having like small one-to-one conversations saying, hey, but I'm really passionate about women in the workplace and I run this private dinner once a month. And from that, I got a board seat, an advisory board position for an accelerator where I was helping them improve the pipeline of female founders. I got to chair our internal resource group. So even just talking to like my existing people, not even anyone new, and letting them know what I was interested in, what my goals were, that ultimately was the catalyst that led me to like build the company I have now. And so I think that start with where you're at right now is a really great point, and then you can kind of see the knock-on effects after. I see this question from Katie Yates. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But how do you make an approach to someone when you are networking? I find that once I'm in a conversation, I feel quite comfortable, but I struggle to approach people. This is a very specific, very real challenge for people, and it can be so scary. So for Katie, I want to start by saying that is very real. Sometimes I think it comes back to what Abam says, that we think we need to like make ourselves really really interesting enough for that person, or that we don't always feel the sense of belonging there. For myself, what I do in those situations, I might take a couple of deep breaths, and also, people, I'm curious. I think leading with curiosity, and you don't know this person, but people generally respond well to people who are curious about them. So asking great questions, what brought you to this event today? What did you enjoy about this? What is it that you're doing in your day-to-day? What do you do for fun? Just asking people questions about themselves, I find is better than, or an easier way for me to make an entry into someone that I don't know. But do you have some other ideas on this question?
So one thing that has worked very well for me in live settings, compliments. With this, you have to be genuine though, right? So if I see someone wearing a jacket I love, that color looks great on you, where did you get it? That's a conversation starter, right? They don't know that I'm a lawyer or I'm a speaker. They don't know anything about me. I don't know anything about them. But that is one way of just starting a conversation. And another easy way of doing it is just introducing yourself and mentioning that, this is very uncomfortable for me. I hope it's okay that I approached you. What I find is a lot of people are actually quite empathetic, right? And they'll say, I know, I hate networking too. My name is so-and-so, how are you? And there you go. So don't overthink it. And a third thing I want to say, connecting to another question someone asked about, what do I have to offer if I'm a junior professional? Don't always think of what can I give you. It's also, I'm new in the energy space. You're a leader for some of your articles. I was wondering about X, right? And ask them a question about it. Or I'd like to have a mentor. Is there anyone you can think of or that you can direct me to, right? Let me share this really quick story. I won a scholarship at age 17 from a foundation. And the president at the time was a lawyer. He read my essay. He said to me, oh, you want to be a lawyer? I'm a lawyer. If you ever need anything, please reach out to me. I told him, don't ever say that to me if you don't need it because I'm a follow-upper, okay? I reached out to him my first year in college and said, you asked me to reach out to you if I needed anything. I'd like an internship. At age 18, I interned at his law firm. When I graduated undergrad to go to law school, I reached out again. He wrote a letter of recommendation for me. When I finished law school, I needed someone to sign off on my bar admissions. He did that for me, and ultimately we ended up working at the same law firm. I say this because, again, let people know what you're looking for. Let them know how they can help you, but also really, really, really big. If someone says to you, reach out to me if you need anything, they offered. Take them up on that offer.
Yeah, great points there. We have some, I know you've touched on some of these, Abam, but top 3 lists of networking conversation openers, go-to topics. So we talked about the compliment. For me, asking more general personal questions. If it was at a talk, what did you enjoy about the talk? Or giving it some insight. I really found this point really interesting. What did you think? But I love that kind of idea of starting with something like a compliment or a question as well. Anything else that you want to add on there, Abam?
No, don't fight to pay for their coffee. Okay, I'm answering the last question. I don't think it impresses anyone that you can buy their coffee because chances are they can buy their own coffee. Okay, so I just say that's not something that I'd highlight. But one thing I will say is, and this has worked for me, get really comfortable with sharing your strengths and practice it at home. Practice your 30-second intro, right? Especially if you're not a kind of off-the-cuff kind of person. I think Yolanda touched on this earlier when she said, know your strength or master your craft. The second part of that is master your craft and be able to communicate it in a really short period of time. Because sometimes you might meet someone who says to you, so what do you do? And we all start to fumble, right? We say 1,000 things that mean nothing. So always have it top of your mind. If I'm asked, what do you do? What is my answer to that question in 30 seconds? I think that allows for conversation flow, and it also makes you comfortable, right? When you go in, at least I can answer one question. It's the primary question that we're likely to hear at networking events. Another thing I would say is, don't be afraid to host. If you have an interest, if you're a foodie, invite people out to a food truck on a free afternoon, right? You never know who will show up. If you like drinks, invite people out. So don't always wait for someone to come to you. Organize things and just see who shows up. You might be pleasantly surprised. Yeah,
that's a great point. We've just run a little bit over time, but just 1 minute over. Maybe we'll answer one last question for those that want to stay on. And Abam, if you're comfortable, is there one that, let's see, that we might want to pursue? I like this one on how do I remain persistent without being annoying. That's a good one. And also perceiving yourself as annoying as well. That's a whole other conversation. That is something I notice a lot with women that we've worked with at Uncommon, for instance, like this idea of like taking up space is inconveniencing someone, or you're asking to connect is putting someone out. I think that is a little bit of a limiting belief, and coming back to knowing your strengths, knowing the value that you bring as well. That is key in connecting with people. And is there anything you want to add on that piece?
Get comfortable with no. It's okay. Not everyone wants to connect with you. I see 2 questions here about how do you deal with rejection and do you persist? If it is clearly rejection, I'd leave it alone. There's a world of people out there, right? On LinkedIn alone, 600 plus million people. So there are other fish in the sea. But the other thing I'll say is, in terms of persistence, don't assume that you're being ignored. Even with my clients today, I might send an email once, twice, 3 times, and I don't hear back. Then I find out they were traveling, or they missed it, or it's sitting in my sent box because I forgot to hit send. Sorry, in my Dropbox, I forgot to hit send. So just assume good intentions, reach out 2 or 3 times, and if it's a no, it's a no. And if they don't respond after a while, make a judgment call and seek back. And then keep looking at other similar profiles of people that you'd like to connect with.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And on the remaining persistent, again, that's maybe where the like soft touches, like whether that's sending someone something that reminded you of them, or something that isn't just a kind of hard ask to connect, but that is how I would remain persistent without being annoying. If someone hasn't responded, every now and then, maybe once a quarter, sending something that that is interesting, and you become a person who's relevant to them, and who's a great resource, and maybe exciting to have a good conversation about. Great.
The last thing I'll say on this note is, Yolanda mentioned earlier how to reach out to Uncommon. Reach out. I run a session on networking with women, right? It's on Belonging IT's website. If you're curious, reach out to me, reach out. This is a skill that are learnable, right? She and I didn't wake up one day and just know how to connect. We had to learn. So learn from those who know how to do it, and don't be shy about reaching out on LinkedIn with questions, comments, reflections. I'm happy to take those. I know Yolanda is too. And just really thank you for opening up and sharing some very vulnerable questions here. I personally appreciate the opportunity to pay it forward the way others have supported my own career. So
thank you. So we've run a little bit over time, but I would love first and foremost to thank Abam. Really, I think you've shared such incredible wisdom, and even though this networking is a subject that's been on my mind for a long time, I really appreciate you sharing such amazing pearls of wisdom, such practical tips that we can definitely all implement in our lives as well. And then I want to thank everyone who's left here now. Thank you for attending this webinar. We hope you took something away from this discussion. Apologies if we're not able to answer all the questions, but feel free to reach out to both Abam or myself on socials, and we'll take it forward from there. Lastly, with Uncommon, we are really building a new type of network for female leaders at Uncommon. This conversation is a taster of some of the topic-led sessions we run in our small group sessions. Networking and building strategic relationships is really something that I know a lot of like-minded women leaders are looking to work on. So we've opened our waitlist for our next cohort. We've also recently introduced our Opportunities Fellow for women leaders who have been impacted by the recent redundancies. So if you or anyone who's been impacted by that, we are closing applications for that tomorrow. So Without further ado, thank you everyone for joining us here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yolanda. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.